Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. Starting up week 2 for the Eastern region here. Time to see who is going to be taking the championship for Cup number 2. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk today is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours here as we recap and bring you all the action here. For these teams, as you get into this Cup play, first they had to move on through the time trials here. So the time trial maps would be taking the cumulative times from all these teams. And the top team, the fastest team here, once again, is Battle for Champion by a nice 5-minute margin here. King's Rest, Atal Dazar, and Freehold were those runs, and here we ended up getting our top 8 teams. Once we got in the top 8, we'd be able to throw them into the brackets and start seeing some of the matchups that we have here. So for game 1, going into that Battle for Champion and Fullscreened here, Sours.
Yeah, it's exciting. So this is Fullscreened. They tried to make it to the Cup last week. They were like 12th or 13th overall the times they didn't quite make it, and they just barely beat out the old OC team from last week coming into this Cup. So just like the 4 minutes separating the first seed and the second seed this week, there was 4 minutes between the 8th and the 9th seed going into this one.
Yeah, some very impressive times coming out of here for Battle for Champion, although they did kind of struggle in that King's Rest though. But Battle for Champion and Fullscreened will be facing off first. We do have the bye going to Buff War Nerf Rogue, as no name end up forfeiting their chances today. So Buff War Nerf Rogue gets the bye. We'll face up against the winner between Team D and Black Mama coming up here. So a lot of representation here, Nagura, that we've seen before. A lot of these teams returning, a lot of these teams performing very well.
Yeah, so I think the 2 teams to watch out for again is Battle for Champ and Team D, of course. Now, one thing to note about Battle for Champ is that they got the first seed again, and they were actually 5 minutes faster in King's Rest in their time trials than like any other team. Now, I think King's Rest is, you know, one of the most difficult dungeons to play with those affixes in the time trials. So maybe, like, even though they seem so good in the time trials, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be so much better in the tournament, because King's Rest we were only going to see twice unless it goes to game 3.
Yeah, a number of times we've seen teams that have just massively improved over their time trial times and their performance as they went into tournament play.
That's actually what I wanted to say, especially in the East region. They just have, you know, it's on paper you kind of predict, and, you know, Sours does his predictions as well, but they were just so wildly different from their time trials. It's even better a lot of the times, the Waycrest Manor from 2 weeks ago. So it's kind of a wild card going on here with them.
Yeah, it seems as we're looking at the schedule real quick to be able to see those matchups, being able to see teams kind of develop over where they usually have performed there has been very interesting to see. So Battle for Champion is going to be our first series of the day, followed up by a Company versus Sun Sky, then Team D versus Black Mamba, followed by double upper semis and 1 lower round, since once again no name did forfeit today, so they are already going to be eliminated from the tournament here. So starting it up with that first round coming up, Battle for Champion versus Fullscreened. Sours. We're going to be going into Motherlode with Tyrannical, Raging, and Necrotic. Whew.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. Like, Necrotic is really bad, especially in a dungeon like Motherlode where you're pulling so many trash mobs. And then Raging, too. A lot of these mobs in Motherlode are very dangerous at any health. And when you get a large trash pool all to below 30% and they all rage at once, anyone could just die at any time.
And I think like neither of those teams have shown that they play DK. And I think DK is really good in Motherlode in general, especially if you have Necrotic, because DK is, you know, they have this huge burst AoE to kill all those mobs off so you don't stack the Necrotic fast. But without the DK, they're obviously going to be lacking a little bit of this burst AoE.
You know, actually, I want to add on to what Sours is saying, and you're absolutely right. Both of you, on top of it all, it's not even just the tank that's in trouble with the Necrotic. There's so much residual damage that goes out on the team's grease gun. We talk about it every week that I'm just kind of expecting to see some melee drop randomly sometimes, especially when the tank is trying to kite and get peel.
Yeah, we've seen a number of times where some of the groups just anytime they have to be able to create space, or some of the areas where we've seen, you know, multiple peacekeepers being pulled all at once, it's just ridiculously dangerous going into it. But Motherlode is going to be our first game of the series, followed up by Gore, and then if we go to a game 3, it will be Freehold. Now, another thing is all 3 of these dungeons so far, Sours, are going to be back-to-back Tyrannicals.
Tyrannical's so brutal, this expansion, I think, compared to like all previous expansions, where I feel like it just adds like one or even 2 minutes to a boss fight, where in the past it was maybe like, okay, it's Tyrannical, it's like 45 seconds longer on a boss, it's not that bad, but it's like 2 minutes longer per boss in this expansion. It's insane.
And it's also 19 now. They played 18 the last time around, and now we have 19. And we've seen in the Western Cup, in the second one with the 19, that there's some teams that struggle a lot with this 19 Tyrannical dungeon, so
we kind of move closer and closer to some of the things we saw in Legion as well, where teams are just pulling aggressively enough where most of the time they're able to pull off some of these pulls here, Sloot, and other times they're just disastrous wipes.
I mean, it's going to be disastrous wipes. I don't know. I have a...
You think it's right off the bat on Motherlode?
I have a bad feeling Motherlode is going to be a pretty bad bloodbath for these teams coming up, and I expect it, again, on paper, as Sours would say, to be a blowout in favor of the first place seed, but we'll see.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Fullscreened doesn't live up to their name, is all I want to say.
I was about to ask that, Sours. I was like, previously, they were alpha males just before the tournament started here. Are they trying to give us a hint? Are they trying to, prepare people's expectations already here?
They might be the Charlie males after this one.
Ooh. Can't wait to see Sours' brutal recaps as we dive into this first game here. Battle for Champion versus Fullscreened. Be sure to vote in chat right now using hashtag BFC or hashtag FS to place your vote on who you think is going to take this.
I think this is going to be pretty bloodbathy instance coming up here. I mean, this is pretty brutal. We talked about it earlier. The necrotic on the tank just stacks up so quickly with the mass amount of trash that Motherlode is kind of famous for. Not in a positive sense by a lot of community people, and then mixed in raging on top of that, we'll see. Nonetheless, both teams getting started off here with a mass shroud going straight to the heart of the first boss's area.
Yeah, so double shroud coming out, and again, there's no DK available for either of those teams. That means if they actually pull up those huge pulls, then it's going to be that much more dangerous because they're just missing this burst there. As we see the rope dropping really low there.
Yeah, I kind of pulled the trigger early there. Tricks of the trade not connecting with the tank before he got smacked a few times. 4 stacks in necrotic. No death or cheat death proc even by Coxie for Fullscreened, as both teams have popped their bloodlust. We already see a bit of defensive kiting come out of the tank for Battle for Champion on the left, just wanting nothing to do with those peacekeepers who cannot be crowd controlled. So you want to make sure you move well away from them before they get their enrage. Now, Nagura, we do of course have Soothes coming out of the Druids, but it has a 10-second cooldown on it.
Yeah, I do believe the Druids want to save their Soothe for something like the Peacekeeper or the Thugs to make sure that, those big mobs that don't deal with the tank so much. But let's be honest here, once the mobs drop below, I do believe the tank is just going to cut as we see the warrior just run away, basically, because if you have so many mobs rage at the same time, it's just so difficult to tank. And we see Rulok actually struggling a little bit here to actually get away from these Peacekeepers.
Yeah, Rulok just got smacked there, picking up some extra trash as he backpedals. And again, just a reminder, we're just starting the day here, so we're on a raging affix here in Motherlode. Every time trash monsters reach 30% health, they will do 100% increased damage, but Rulok goes down here for Fullscreened and just gets smacked, flattened like a pancake as Coxie runs away as quickly as he can, making sure that he doesn't incur another death. No cheat death proc that I saw, but they do manage to get the battle res off. Not going to be available again for another 8 minutes or so. So already starting off on not a great note here, very early in the dungeon.
Yeah, we definitely saw the difficulty here of these trash pulls, especially because the healer actually got stunned by the Thug, so he got charged and stunned, while the tank obviously got so much damage from those mobs, so he didn't have healing available to him because of the stun or the CC on the healer, and just went down. And kiting also a problem here, of course, if they don't have slows available to them. You do have a Ring of Peace and stuff like that, but Peacekeepers, they are not so easily CC'd, so you're definitely going to watch out for those.
I certainly don't want that. Jack doing well to soothe all of the targets for Battle for Champion as they've dealt with their first Reaping Wave after 20%, and doing a fairly large pull with that Reaping Wave here on the left side of the screen. Fullscreened still working to get their first round of Reaping. A lot of trouble coming in the air as Rulo is already kiting defensively just for a few mobs. Coxie gets a few smacks, and we do know, we said earlier, that there's going to be a lot of residual damage that goes out onto the melee that is just inevitable and has nothing to do with proximity of the tank. So a lot of work for the healer. Spider gets really close to death there at 7%, just barely gets healed up as Fullscreened's kind of frantically kiting around. Battle for Champion, though, Nagura looking really solid here, actually. They're kind of composing themselves well. No deaths on the board. Dealt well with that first Reaping Wave and some more Peacekeepers to boot.
Yeah, we are seeing some difficulties here coming in for both of the teams just because of the brutality of these mobs. Like the Thugs, for example, as I said, they stun you randomly, and if it overlaps with another ability, then you're just unable to dodge. For example, we see one of the rogues on Battle for Champ got hit by the smash from one of the Reaping mobs, probably was stunned by a Thug, and then you also have all the mobs raging at the same time. So if you do have double Thugs charge a player while they're raging, as you see Rule actually going down a Fullscreen side here.
Rulo goes down again for Fullscreen. No battle is available for another 6 minutes or so, so they're going to have to work to finish off the rest of this Reaping Wave, which should be pretty easy for them as Kegro will be able to get the res off afterwards. But by now, honestly, could have just released and run back and not had to wait for the Druid to heal, to resurrect him. About a 10-second res on that, scaling with haste. So both of them trying to get the res off, full screen, waiting to get their tank up, whilst Battle for Champion at 32% trash, still kiting around frantically, trying to get those necrotic stacks reset on the tank, which is just so hard to do with these Peacekeepers that are not crowd controllable. But they do often pause to cast, one of several casts, allowing the tank to kind of get away in the meantime. Now, just to finish up the review, we do have necrotic here starting in the dungeon as well, meaning that any melee connects with the tank, or hopefully only the tank, will increase your stacks of necrotic by 1 every time, which decreases your healing taken by 2% and adds a physical debuff to you, a physical bleed.
Yeah, so Battle for Champ already triggering their second Reaping Wave here, of course. Now, one thing to note in this dungeon in Motherlode is that there's a lot of trash in this dungeon, but there's a lot of trash you don't really want to kill because it's so difficult and it's not very efficient. So that's why we see both of those teams just pulling as much trash as possible in this first room before the first boss, basically. And we did see some different kind of pulls coming out of the Western region last time around, but that's mostly because it was teaming, and of course with teaming you need more trash to get your 100%. So I do believe that both Battle for Champ and Fullscreened are going to get most of their percentage here in this area.
Yeah, more traditional kind of 90 to 95% region before even engaging with the first boss is what a lot of teams do. Now, yeah, certainly in the West region last week we saw a lot of R&D pulls, quite disastrous actually for MDI as well. Didn't work out too well for them. So it seems that these two teams, at least Battle for Champion so far, is certainly sticking to a more traditional route that we've seen in this spring season here, as Battle for Champion is approaching halfway through their trash percentage and has dealt with their second Reaping Wave. Fullscreened once again defensively, jumping away, Rulock, the warrior tank, making sure that he doesn't have another death. Both deaths on the board have been from the tank, but Battle for Champions were just in a bit of trouble here. 26 stacks of necrotic as he moves away from the rest of the mobs, but those fall off immediately after combat ends, so the team can quite sprucely pick up the next pack.
Yeah, so both of those teams, of course, used their Bloodlust for the very first pull, so I do believe that both teams want to get their Bloodlust back up before they go to the boss. Now, again, they don't have a DK, so they can't do this Method EU kind of strat where they would pop the Bloodlust on the boss and have the DK just do an insane amount of damage to the boss while he has the damage increased on him, so you can't really do that. But I still believe that both of those teams are just going to save the Bloodlust because it's a tyrannical environment and bosses just take so long, especially if you don't have a Bloodlust available.
Ring of Peace coming down defensively to protect the healer for Battle for Champion here, Jack on the left side, making sure that none of those empowered Thug charges get through. Not only raging, but also empowered. The Thugs do an Inhale Vapors cast that will increase their damage done as well. You can see that random members of the team get chunked down, but the Warrior at 4%, barely hanging on, 7% now, as Jack is trying to pour as much healing into him as possible, safely running away from these mechanized Peacekeepers that are about to hit 30% in just a moment. Once Samdi's Trinket has procced on the Warrior, you can see the debuff on the player frame. Not going to have that cheat death like advantage available again for another 6 minutes as the third Reaping Wave comes in. Barely hanging on, 10% now. Just doesn't have a moment to breathe as Jack gets chunked as well. A lot of struggles here for Battle for Champion.
There's just so many different dangerous mobs here, especially if you pull it on top of Reaping. We saw Jack drop really low too, probably because of those Grave Bolts that are coming out from the Reaping mobs, on top of just other AoE abilities coming out from the trash itself, or charges from the Thugs, or if there's a jockey, he also has a Grease Cannon that randomly shoots players. And if they're enraging, then everything pretty much can one-shot you or just drop you really, really low. So that's why we see those players just struggling so much with this trash here.
And then let's not forget about the Ice Spritzer as well from the caster, the Cola Refresher. We have the Assassins here that we're seeing Battle for Champion pull. These need to have babysat quite heavily as well. You want to interrupt their Toxic Blades. You got to make sure that you at least soft crowd control their Flechettes cast, which you saw be pretty disastrous for some teams last week in the West Cup, especially not even under this Raging Affix. Fullscreened now 45% on the board, cleaning up that last trash pack. Have had another death on the board, so 3 for them, and they've dealt with their second Reaping Wave, whilst Battle for Champion looking to proc their fourth Reaping Wave momentarily. Probably with this pack here, I would assume, Nagura. It's pretty big, pretty big pack here.
Most definitely. We see Jack actually dropping really low. He's been very unlucky with those Thug charges as he's been targeted by the last 4 or 5, I believe. So definitely good on Jack for recovering here and healing himself back up and also managing to heal the tank properly. But yeah, one thing to note here as well, I keep talking about the DK missing here, but DK is just very good for this dungeon specifically. And one thing that they don't have is this grip, right? Because the jockeys, if if you engage with the jockeys, they will start running to a Peacekeeper and activate the Peacekeeper, which is very important because you need the percentage from the Peacekeepers. So if you don't have the grip, you can't get them closer to the Peacekeeper to activate it. Of course, you can also do stuff with Typhoon and Ring of Peace, but it's much more difficult to do it that way compared to with a Death Grip, of course.
So many thugs being pulled on both sides as Tupac's Thugs Mansion gets essentially emptied out here within the Motherlode. Fullscreen now 56% as they finally deal with a triple pack of thugs. Battle for Champion, though, not stopping as the train goes full on ahead, and at 80% finally comes in 4th Reaping Wave. But there's a few thugs in here, 2 mech jockeys and 2 Peacekeepers, along with the 80% trash coming in. A lot of damage on one of the rogues as he goes down, gets the Dispel from the healer, not going to be available again for 8 seconds. So got to keep careful with the stack management from the Risen Souls that come with these Reaping Waves. Cheat Death procs on one of the rogues right now, and the tank barely holding on, does not have the Cheat Death trinket available. 11% now as he struggles to get dispelled, running around frantically in circles with all the raging mobs and the Risen Souls as well. But surprisingly, Jack actually manages to stabilize the group there, Nagura.
Yeah, that was so close. I do believe it was a Spritzer going off on one of the rogues here while the vendor was raging. So of course every tick does so much damage, and we see Fullscreen struggling still. They have 1 death coming in, they don't have a battle rest available to them. They have to finish up this pull without him because of course he can't really stealth back. Okay, he can stealth back, but it's going to take him a long time because obviously there's a lot of trash they pulled at the start. So they choose to have him release, and the rest of them just trying to deal with those Peacekeepers as everyone drops low.
Yeah, we see Battle for Champion here with a more common percentage going into coin-operated crowd pummeler. It's it's late, but kind of early for us in a way, so we're still getting used to the time slot here. But nonetheless, 95% on the boss. You will notice at home that we have actually added healing meters for everybody to enjoy, so you can kind of compare how the healers do. But not only the healers themselves, but important to look at the kind of support that some of the other players can bring, especially the Prot Warrior, what kind of HPS they are doing, which allows the healer themselves to be more offensive. So something that those of you at home can now keep an eye on. Battle for Champion, 73% on coin-operated crowd pummeler as they deal with the first static shock and make sure to sidestep that big shockwave frontal.
Yeah, so they obviously want to make sure to maximize the single target damage as much as possible, as you're going to lose so much time on a single target boss like that on Tyrannical if you don't. So they also want to make sure that we see those foot bombs, of course, on the ground. So you want to put 2 of them on the boss first as a damage increase, and then you want to delay the last bomb a little bit because it will refresh the duration of the damage increase on the boss. As we see the Bloodlust being popped by Battle for Champ here, while the 3 debuffs are on the boss.
Fullscreen just now dealing with the last pack before coin-operated crowd pummeler, 70%. They haven't procced their 4th Reaping Wave, might opt to take it into the boss. I don't think they'll have enough trash with these 3 members, so we'll have to see exactly what they do as we're halfway through the Bloodlust for Battle for Champion on the main screen here, moving over to kick all of those foot bombs into the boss properly, making sure that none of them miss, else they will actually hit the players instead, and then right after kiting the boss well out of those coins on the floor. If he absorbs those coins, he will gain a 10% stack of damage increase for the rest of the fight, really, per pile of coin grabs. So certainly want to move away from that. There's already a lot of damage going out for healing.
Yeah, and also one thing to note here is the Windwalker damage, of course, for Battle for Champion, doing more damage than both of the rogues. So we keep saying that, you know, the physical damage from the Windwalker is very important, and that's why you see the Windwalker. But it's really not only that, because Windwalkers themselves also do a lot of damage, as you can see here. Not only AoE, but also very good at single target. So definitely a reason to bring Windwalker here. And Jack the Restored, of course, also trying to do as much damage as possible as he shifts into cat and out of cat form. Yeah,
doing a fair bit of damage too. But on the side of Fullscreen now, we have pulled the boss as well, and we're seeing that Bloodlust was popped. 10 seconds left on that, 72% on the board. Now, take a look at the 2 tank trinkets right now. Battle for Champions Prot Warrior is running Bonsamdi's Bargain, so he does have that cheat death effect every 6 minutes, which just now is coming off cooldown and saved him that death earlier. 4 deaths on the board for Fullscreen, and we have their tank running the Refracting Prism, meaning he's getting a stacking absorb every 8 to 10 seconds, of course, depending on the amount of haste he has stacks on his character. But, you know, you got to think, maybe he should have gone with Bonsamdi's Trinket earlier.
Maybe.
It could have prevented some of the deaths and some of the mayhem that happened on the trash instead of just that healing over time, healing per second effect that would help out for the healer. Nonetheless, 75% for them, as Battle for Champion very close to proccing their final Reaping Wave.
Yeah, so the Prot Warrior and Battle for Champs that actually went up to 43 necrotic stacks, but he ended up kiting and they finished the pull properly. Now, it was a pretty difficult pull because those sappers, they do have some nasty casts on the tank or to random targets, especially when they're all raging. So well done for Battle for Champ. And they are 99% here, so this means they only need to pull one more thing, anything really, and they can proc their last Reaping Wave as they're on their way to fight the second boss here.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. From some of the West teams last week, we saw that they opted to kind of leave more trash up on this boss, and then once Azarok hits his snooze phase, so to speak, once these 4 Earth Ragers go down, there's not really too much that happens on the boss, so teams would constantly grab trash and grab Reaping packs on top of Azarok, something that Battle for Champion doesn't have the luxury to do with this more traditional routing, as anything they kill, as Nagura mentioned, will just proc Reaping. Now, I mean, it's not the end of the world, to be honest, here. If they proc Reaping on top of the boss, could gain a bit from it, so we'll see if they opt to do that, or kill the boss and proc their 5th Reaping Wave at the same time, and then just kind of run down through the R&D wing to Rixa and just do a mass shadow meld there from the Night Elves.
Yeah, so we've seen some like optimizations of strategies in the Western region, and I feel like, or as far as I'm aware, the only team that really tried to copy some of the strategies or adapt their strategies to the Western region was Team D. I think Team D definitely looked at the Western region, looked at their fast times, and copied some of their strategies, while Battle for Champ are kind of doing their own thing in most of the dungeons, so still not adapting to the strategy here where you know, as you said, just have a little bit more percentage left and then pull it on top of the boss, which I do believe is more efficient because else you have to backtrack at some point to skip this last Reaping, which backtracking is never really efficient. And then, of course, also not running the DK here, which might actually cost them later on if they just really don't know how to play it at all, because Team D, we know, of course, has the DK available to them.
Yeah, a lot of bleed stacks on the one rogue, just refuses to get out as his 5 necrotic stacks and 4 stacks of the bleed. Those Earth Ragers fixate random targets, and of course, if they get in a range of them, will stack a bleed damage over time on you, so making the healer's life a bit tough there. No cheat deaths available for the rogues either, as the one that incurred the damage is just about to reset the cooldown on that. Now, there shouldn't be too much backtracking though here in Nagura. They could just kind of pull that defensive, the Taskmaster pack beside them and then just rush down to the R&D wing, but certainly they could have made a bit more efficiency out of it. But you know what, even if Battle for Champion is not conforming to some of the Western standards for these dungeons, it's working for them right now. Their time's pretty good, 0 deaths on the board, they've been fairly aggressive as you can be at least with these affixes, and it's working out quite well for them. But we do know that the 2 bosses coming up after this can be pretty nasty. Fullscreen still dealing with their own trash, as we see a cheat death proc over there for Auto. They've killed the first boss and are dealing with their 4th Reaping Wave right now.
Yeah, Battle for Champ definitely a super clean run so far. It looked pretty simple when they pulled those huge trash packs with a bunch of Peacekeeper, a bunch of Wenders, and a bunch of Bugs. But it worked out for them, and they're just having pretty good control from all the teams, from all the members here coming in. Jack doing a good job, and also this is Steve from the damage dealers and the kiting from the warrior tank. So definitely clean from them here as they down the boss. There's really only 2 bosses left at this point, right? So they're most likely going to skip a lot of trash here. Maybe they proc their Reaping as we see them pulling the left side here. Just only need to kill 1 mob. Then they can walk through, they can shadow melt the Reaping plus the trash that they're skipping.
Yeah, so really efficient pull here from them. Nice view from the observers there as we take a little minecart ride down the minefield. Battle for Champion has indeed procced their 100%, 5th Reaping Wave, as Nagura said, jumping straight into the boss room and getting ready to shadow meld all of that aggro off and start working right on Rixa. So we're pretty much going to see back-to-back boss action here from Battle for Champion. But Rixa herself is actually, you know, not the most mechanically intense boss, but numerically quite intense. She does pure fire damage on the tank, as we can already see that charge in with a huge chunk of damage coming in. But also the diseases that she puts on the 2 closest targets can be quite nasty. But these chemical burns, I mean, these players, they have a nice comp, Nagura, that they can deal with it quite well.
Yeah, most definitely. There's of course you have the rogues who can just cloak off the debuff. They can rotate whoever is the closest target to get this debuff on them to use the cloak ability. Then of course you also have the Karma that the Windwalker can use, or you can also just have a defensive from Jack coming out. So I don't think it should be a huge problem for them to deal with this mechanic here, as I'm pretty sure the Power Warrior can also spell reflect this, as far as I'm aware, also increasing the damage a little bit. So as long as you rotate those defenses properly, it really should not be a big deal. Now, of course, one more thing that you have to be aware of in this fight is your positioning, because you don't want to bait the abilities on in the wrong spot, basically.
Yeah, you certainly don't want those goops of Azurite blocking off your real estate on the rest of the platform. So you have to use the propellant blast that is targeted towards one of the party members to kind of push the rest of the gunk off of the platform and have a nice clean amount of area to do the work you got to do. And as Fullscreened now 95% on the board, working on a couple of those Stone Furies. So a bit of a different trash pull came out of them, working up to Azurok, but 6 deaths on the board. Something you'll hear us kind of parrot a lot throughout the spring season, because those deaths have just been so many times a decider of the winners of some of the maps with how close the matches have been. But this one certainly not close, as Battle for Champion reaches 1/3 health remaining on Rixa, and they look to try and close out this first game and get to the last boss.
Yeah, Battle for Champ definitely showing why they are the first seed here. They're just so much faster here compared to Fullscreen. Even if Fullscreen didn't have really huge wipes or anything, they did have a couple of deaths, of course, but you know, their strategy just slower. Their route is just slower, right? Battle for Champ just went in, did those huge pulls, had this good control, no deaths, super clean by them, so definitely deserve to be the #1 spot here, and that's what we can see here coming out of Battle for Champ as they're about to down the 3rd boss, while Fullscreen just pretty much engaged the 2nd boss.
Yeah, so very, very behind for them, as Rix is now at 7% for Battle for Champion. After this, we're going to see the double shroud come up from the teams. They'll try to make their way up the hill as quickly and as faintly as possible without getting detected, but there are some more of these Peacekeeper-style robots on the way that have what is known as True Sight, meaning that they have stealth detection essentially and can see member stealth. So you're going to see them weave here through a lot of the trash. Nobody really ever pulls this trash. It's just one of the side effects of having so much trash percentage and trash count within this dungeon. It gives you a lot of room in terms of what you want to clear and what you don't want to clear. But finally, the War Machines have detected the players as they frantically run up. The Prot Warrior does kind of go to the side. We see the Trinket proc for them as he pulls everything so that the rest of the party can safely run into the 4th boss's room and use that Shadow Meld.
Yeah, this is the beauty of Shadow Meld, of course. As, on Liveserve, I think one of the mobs actually didn't reset here, so they might have the tank needs to die. Okay, so it was only the tank who was encumbered, so they're not going to lose too much time. They also used the Battle Rest here, I believe, because they had so many left, right? So 0 deaths so far, might as well use a Battle Rest to save time as they engage the last boss here. But yeah, Shadow Meld, just so many uses, especially for skipping trash. So in dungeons like Motherlode, just so efficient here.
Certainly. Mogul Razdunk has been pulled here for Battle for Champion, the final boss of the dungeon. Now, the main positioning really that you want to watch out for here, if you have a bird's eye view down, it's essentially a 3x2 rectangle. So you'll have 3 columns and 2 rows, and you just want to make sure that the boom bots on the side do not hit you with their missiles. They will fill up 1 row and 1 column of the areas. You can see the players move here. Now, there are some kind of safe positions that we've seen, as certainly a lot of the Western teams do, by putting down world markers between these quadrant locations, allowing them to really not have to move the boss too much, who is super irritatingly immobile a lot of the time. Just so many casts, so the players can just kind of sidestep these missiles and avoid it altogether. But once we get to 50%, there will be essentially an immunity phase transition on the boss.
Yeah, so during the immunity, you need to make sure that if you get targeted by the boss, if you get this red arrow over your head, you need to run to one of those pillars, because the boss will come to you and will charge down, and he's got a shield that only will be removed if it hits those pillars. So you want to make sure that you hit all 3 of them. And then one more ability here is this missile that we see going out on Jack, as you can see him switching into bear form to reduce the damage a little bit. But you know, it really only goes on range, so it will only be on Jack, and it will not give him a lot of problems at all, as he, you know, just goes in bear form, barely takes any damage, just heals himself back up. So as long as he positions properly, this boss really shouldn't be a big deal.
No, it shouldn't be a problem for them, as Fullscreen finally do their respective skip after Azurok and getting ready to pull Rixa. So they're essentially 2 or at least a boss and a half entirety behind here, as Mogul Razdunk enters the phase transition here for Battle for Champion. Just looking so dominant right now between not only the 2 teams, but we'll have to see how the rest of the teams perform in this Cup. We do know they were one of the main contenders in, the East Cup. We do know they were one of the main contenders in the first East Cup 2 weeks ago, albeit they did play 2nd place. A bit of damage coming in here on one of the rogues, actually, as he does proc that sheet death, but they just have the cushion, so much cushion right now. Cooldowns are probably readily available. Bloodlust is available in a moment, as Mogul will exit this transition phase, and they have 2 battle reses, so just in case one of the rogues does flop over, they have that safety net available to them as well.
Yeah, definitely very good showing here from Battle for Champ as they popped their last bloodlust here to make sure they kill the last boss as well without any more deaths. Yeah, so only one death in this dungeon, and we talked about this earlier. Motherlode with these affixes definitely very difficult. So I do think that the other teams that are probably watching this in the Eastern region, they definitely have to watch out for this team, Battle for Champ, the #1 seed, just having such a clean showing in the very first dungeon here.
Yeah, really clean showing. I mean, the only death they had, I'm pretty sure, Nagura, was just the tank kind of pulling to the side there and not managing to drop aggro when already 98% of the dungeon had been completed. Mogul Razdan here, 22% on the board as Jack kites that missile nice and far, making sure that that big red, big orange radius does not clip any other member in the group. Rixa still at 38% for Fullscreened, and with 7 deaths on the board, so just not going their way today.
Yeah, definitely Battle for Champion just playing so much cleaner as they're one full boss ahead pretty much. Now Fullscreened also needs a 3% trash left, so they definitely also have pretty much a different route that they're playing that we haven't really seen before. But, you know, it's just not working out for them. Of course, comparing to the first seed as the #8 seed is always a little bit mean, I guess, but, you know, for the 8th seed strategy, they're not doing that bad.
Not doing that bad at all, but 1-0 here for Battle for Champion as they quite dominantly claim the first match of the series, Mr. Jack.
And Battle for Champion looking like that #1 seed coming out with a very strong showing here on Motherlode there. And at this point, you really start looking at Team D and Battle for Champion here, Sours, where these are the top 2 teams. Battle for Champion once again going into that #1 seed, and it doesn't really seem like they're going to be satisfied until they actually take a championship.
I mean, that's their name.
Yeah.
They're battling for the championship, Jack. That's why they're here. They're trying to get first place. They just barely didn't make it last time. They got second in the tournament, but first seed in the time trials. They might be able to do it this week.
Yeah, and at this point, you know, Fullscreened had pretty rough going throughout this run here.
Yeah, it was, you know, it's kind of an unfortunate dungeon for Fullscreened. Nothing ever went like terribly wrong for them, but they just kind of lost a member here and there, where Battle for Champion just kind of had perfect pulling and they just pulled ahead. Their kill count was perfect. Even the 99% was like a very perfect 99%, where they're able to get their 100% here. They're at 383 out of 384 kill count for the dungeon. So they all just focus on one single mob, and then they just, boom, they're out of there. Like this was well executed. This looks like it was a well-practiced dungeon by Battle for Champion. A very impressive performance overall.
Yeah, now next round we're going to be moving on to Gore here. And we've seen a couple different alterations for strategies here, Nagura, but it's just all been about those cannons, right? From there, I think it's been what Jez Howler's room has been a particular pressure point for some groups going out throughout this runs.
Definitely. We've seen, I think, so far the cleanest run by a Method and A in the Western region, as they had those very interesting strategy points in just Howler's room. So interesting to see if some of those teams actually going to copy that strategy, or at least copy some of those small things that the Method and A was doing. But we've also seen some very fast times from Team D coming out. So wonder if Battle for Champion does any of those things here.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how they kind of bring out a statement here. But before we go into the game 2 here, Cyrus, what's that big highlight we got for #1?
Sure, it was really just kind of just how well Battle for Champion executed this dungeon. They're doing this huge pull with all 4 of these mob packs right after the first boss, which got them to their exact kill count they needed for the dungeon, and they executed this flawlessly. They only needed 1 Ring of Peace for big CC really going into this pack. They did it like they did this pull with a warrior tank as opposed to with a Death Knight tank. Gathered everything up flawlessly. They didn't even Typhoon everything. It was like, that's the kind of play that you expect to see out of the top quality teams, whether they're from the East or West region.
And Cyrus, you've changed.
Well,
complimenting teams now. What's going on?
So there's actually the thing about that, right? Is there wasn't anything like so horribly wrong that Fullscreened did this game that was like, okay, this is why they lost. They were just kind of slow overall. But the level of execution in a play like that out of Battle for Champion is worthy of highlighting in the same way that a catastrophic failure is worthy for highlighting in an event that does happen.
You were like a son to me.
Good to get a nice highlight there instead of the low lights. But we will return with game 2. Don't go anywhere, guys. The Mythic Dungeon International will return just after this short break. Battle for Champion, the #1 seed here, taking game 1 in the Motherlode against their opponents, Fullscreened. The only Oceanic team we've got right now in this tournament. I'm Jack, and joining me at the desk is Sloot, Nagura, and Sours here. And as we move on to game 2, Sours, Gore's been a dungeon of like really highs and really low lows here for a lot of the boss fights and sort of corralling a lot of the trash packs together.
And it's tyrannical again. This
You love it.
Some rough, hard bosses in here. The third boss especially, I think, is going to really come down to coordination of groups. It's a funny boss, right? Where if you do the boss correctly, okay, some barrels on the ground, let's grab the barrel, pull to the corner. It's pretty easy. Okay, if you're like, okay, you don't need to do no barrels in here, everything goes really poorly, really fastly. Hopefully they don't get full screened here.
Fastly indeed.
Fastly indeed. Think about that. Stolen the words right out of my mouth here, Sloot. Tyrannical, Quaking, Skittish here. Sloot, you mentioned a number of times Skittish is not going to be an issue, but tight corners here on Quaking is going to be pretty rough.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Quaking's it can affect you. It's usually kind of a freer week when you look at live servers, but it's usually dangerous in one of two ways: either tight knit spaces, which you're going to have a lot of in this dungeon, especially with the full melee comp constantly needing to spread out in spaces that they just might not have, or just really poor timing, which we saw affect some teams on King's Rest in the West Cup last week. You get a bad Quaking at the wrong time when the healer needs to pump out some healing, maybe even on the Sand Queen coming up here, and it could spell disaster for the teams.
Well, it certainly spelled disaster when you stood on me with your Quaking last night here, but Battle for Champion with a 60% advantage as we roll into game 2, where Fullscreened needs this one to stay alive in the series.
Ball result 60% for Battle for Champions. So a lot of faith actually in both teams here from Twitch chat right now, Nagura.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I kind of expected Battle for Champ to get some more because, you know, they had a really good showing here in the first dungeon, but they still love for the Oceanic team, of course.
We already see the world markers placed down for Fullscreened here. Now, a lot of teams opt to just kind of skip a lot of the trash. As we see the boss and trash get pulled here for a Battle for Champion, immediate Bloodlust goes up. So not the most effective Bloodlust in terms of boss damage, as there will be an upheaval burrow 20 seconds after aggroing the boss the first time. Full phase 1 upstairs is usually 40 seconds, but there's a half phase just at the beginning of the pull, but they want to get this Bloodlust out as quickly as possible to get rid of those crabs. But Fullscreened as well with the Bloodlust there, Nagura.
Yeah, I think the only team that did not bloodlust the first boss was Method and A, and we kind of liked their strategy. So both Battle for Champ and Fullscreened not really adapting to this bloodlust strategy, just using it for the first boss here. But as you said, the upheaval definitely gonna get them some lower uptime on the boss. Now, when it comes to trash percentage here, we've seen a couple of different strategies. We've seen some teams proccing 2 Reaping Waves before they go to the cannon part, and some teams only proccing 1. Now, in theory, you only need, I believe, 16% before you go up to the upper room, but there's some mobs that are not that nice to pull into the cannons because they just take so long to pull. So that's why we've seen a couple of different strategies coming out for most of the teams here. But yeah, Battle for Champ already having 11% trash, while Fullscreened has 0, of course, because they didn't pull anything on top.
Yeah, and they're ahead on the boss by about 3%, 4%, so really looking good for them right now. Fullscreened doing a really nice rotation here for 3-point system, making sure that they bait these sand traps in the different world markers that you see. By the time you need to return to the first world marker, the traps will naturally have despawned, or somebody, of course, can go soak them with an immunity. So just small little rotation here, and they need to conserve space as much as possible because there just isn't a lot of it. They didn't clear any of the trash. Battle for Champions, Jack coming out with the Tree of Life, getting as much healing on the team as they can before Sand Queen reburrows, spreading out well for this Quaking. Now, just a reminder for those at home, we are in a Quaking affix, meaning that every 20 seconds or so, likely a Quaking will happen that will damage you for 20% of your max health and interrupt any active spellcast you're doing, including clipping some members. But the Skittish affix, you know, not one we usually focus a lot on, Nagura, especially with these Prot Warriors.
Yeah. You know, Prot Warriors is doing so much damage, as you can see on both of the damage meters right now. That Skittish is not really a huge deal for them. And also they do have the double rogues with Tricks of the Trade, just getting them more aggro, basically. So Skittish not a big deal for those kind of team comps at all, so they can basically just ignore that affix completely. Now, one thing to note that Jack actually playing Tree of Life is, I believe, kind of weird, because in this dungeon, as we see them drop really low, but they recover with the Tranquility. But yeah, Tree of Life is a 3-minute cooldown that you take when there's, you know, a bunch of big pulls coming in throughout the dungeon, where you can actually make use of this big cooldown instead of having something like Cultivation that buffs you all the time. Now, in this dungeon, there is not a lot of huge trash pulls to do, though, because you do most of the things with the cannons, right? So I wonder why he chose this. Maybe they're doing some bigger pull into just Howlers later, and that's why he's taking it. We'll have to see.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Indeed, Battle for Champion has dealt with the Sand Queen, the first boss. We get the sap on the Severed Vice Jaw, Sewer Vice Jaw there on the side as they run past this Thug. Now, this Thug, more of a Lieutenant-style mob, can't be crowd control and does do a really annoying, demoralizing cast that will decrease your damage done by 50% for 7 seconds. So they opt not to deal with any of that, skipping the entirety of this wing as they rush upstairs to Jess Hallis's floor, getting that Shadow Meld in and then preparing with a sap and then a Mass Shroud past the rest of this trash, going straight up really aggressively, really quickly, and well coordinated. And we're already actually at Jess Hallis's floor. Definitely they will be proccing their first Reaping here. Kind of curious to see what they combine it into, because we've seen some teams take that first Reaping in with Jess Hallis themselves and actually end up dying because the tank gets stunned at the 70% transition and then just takes too many stacks from the Risen Souls.
Yeah, so very fast run here coming up at Battle for Champ, very fast skip rather, while on full screen side we actually see one death coming out of the Rogue. I do believe it happened while he was opening those cages. He probably didn't have Vanish ready or used it in the wrong time, so we do see one rest coming out here, but I do believe they managed to open all of those cages, getting the buffs, getting the hopefully attack power, of course is what they are aiming for the most here, and stamina maybe 2 for the tyrannical bosses.
So she should see the first Reaping wave here for Battle for Champion as they reach 21% indeed. Already have dealt with the 3 Arsonist pack in the corners. Rather nasty mobs for the tank as they will put a stacking fire damage over time on you. Grabbing the first Reaping into the dangerous Sea Speaker double pull here right near the boss. Now, these Sea Speakers cast Salt Blast, which is a fairly heavy hit on the tank, but most importantly, the Water Dome. If the Water Dome goes through, it will shield all enemies around for a substantial absorb and just delay and eat up so much damage that likely you're going to run out of gas and die.
Yeah, so Battle for Champ actually engaging the boss here while still having a bunch of Reaping Souls up here. As long as they kill the Reaping Souls before the 70% mark, then they should be fine, as their Reaping Souls are pretty low here as well. Now, you gotta also watch out for the casters, of course, because the caster Reaping mobs, they don't really want to move that much. So you want to line of sight them to make sure they come over, or somehow range interrupt them, which is gonna be very difficult if you have a full melee lineup.
Right, you are. Jess Hallis, 80%. We did mention earlier that at 70% the transition happens. Jess Hallis will run around the entirety of the dungeon, opening the 1 cage at a time and releasing some of the prisoners. The final cage will have Bobby Hallis, the brother of Jess Hallis, which will do a fair bit of damage just to the tank, but also, most importantly, will do vicious mauling on a random player and stun them in that spot unless somebody interrupts it. So the combination of that plus the flashing daggers cast from Jess Hallis can actually just get somebody very easily killed. So you need some well-coordinated interrupts to make sure that you deal properly with the last phase. Players doing well here to spread out for the Quaking, as Fullscreened has moved up to the same floor, 14% on the board for them, and Jess Hallis awaits them right after this pack. It looks like they might actually be getting ready to pull their first Reaping pack into Jess as well.
Yeah, so Battle for Champ also did this tiny little trick that we have seen the first time from Method and A, I believe, is where they pulled Jess Hallis closer to the very first cage, because once the transition starts, he will move there and open them. So if the boss is already close to the cage, he will obviously lose less time by walking there. It's a very tiny gain, maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but definitely worth it. And we see Battle for Champ actually also pulled an Arsonist here on top of the boss, so they gotta watch out for that as well, because it can get quite dangerous with those debuffs and the Quaking on top of the boss abilities.
Yeah, the torch fire damage over time debuff actually hit the Rogue initially there, so fortunately the Dispel finally came in from Jack, but just a lot of extra damage while there was so much going on with the Prot Warrior at the same time. Jess Hallis now down to 30%, Bobby down to 50%, so just a lot of residual cleave on Bobby, just shows the power of the cleave with some of these compositions. Jess Hallis now at 25%, but 75% for Fullscreened on the right side, so not too far behind. They do have some of that first Reaping wave, as alluded to, still active in the pack, and it's about to transition, so they do manage to kill. Oh, there's only 1 Risen Soul left, shouldn't be a problem for them. Not too many stacks on the tank, so Fullscreen should quite safely transition here as a Battle for Champion looking to finish off Jess Hallis in a moment. So just like the last map, Nigger, I mean, you know, nothing is really going badly for Fullscreen. They're just doing everything slower.
Yeah, definitely, and also just everything a little bit smarter, as we can also just note the boss positioning here for Battle for Champ, as they are line of sighting at the exit and not at this doorway kind of thing that we see mostly in live servers. People will line of sight at the doorway, but if Bobby runs away, as he sometimes does, and then he casts a fear somewhere really far away, then of course there's no one who can interrupt it because they don't have a ranged. So with this positioning, they can just kind of line of sight Bobby's fear if he runs away. So definitely very smart positioning, and just dealing with everything perfectly here.
So Battle for Champion getting some crowd control up and just running up as quickly as they can. We see the Swiftfoot potion being popped here by the Prot Warrior as they run through, frantically grabbing everything, making sure the entire floor is aggro. That's a lot of damage if you get clipped on the side. A lot of fireballs coming in as well, and pulling it straight into the cannons here that overlook the jailhouse of Tolt de Gore. Battle for Champion getting ready, going around the corner, line of sighting these mobs well, as the rogues making sure to pre-tricks of the trade so that they could transfer all of their threat to the tank before getting in the cannon and doing the mass damage, as you can see on the damage meter right now. Kind of looks like an unholy DK with a mass pull, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can also see that one of the rogues is not actually close here, because I assume the rogue actually walked over, as we can see the diamond marker here. He's walking over to the right side, going into this right cannon, as you can see the stealth coming out, because you want to have one rogue in the right cannon, one rogue in the left cannon, just dealing with the mobs at the very same time, just being so efficient, especially because there are no affixes that really prevent them from doing those big pulls. There's no bursting, as we have seen from the Western region. There's no sanguine. So quaking skid is definitely not something that will prevent them from doing those huge pulls, as we can see here.
No, certainly not. But there's a lot of damage coming in on the tank as they go down. When somebody's trinket has proc, they do have the battle res available, but all of these mobs are now going to be threatless on the tank, running around to the rogues in the cannons as they pop out, getting ready to tricks of the trade on the tank again. This is actually pretty disastrous as Jack just struggles to heal everyone up with all of these grave bolts, shooting in random directions. It looks like they've managed to stabilize right now. Now, they have to also be very careful in this time of kind of frantic craziness that they don't accidentally hit somebody with the cannon, which you can do. You can actually kill your own teammate. Does a lot of damage, but the rogue proccing cheat death here, as he did get clipped by one of the green swirlies that come from the Lost Souls, one of the reaping mobs. It does decrease your damage and healing done by 10% for 30 seconds, so almost a close call there from them.
Yeah, definitely a scary moment here coming in for Battle for Champ, but they managed to recover now. They did proc their 80% reaping wave, and just look at the time, right? They've been here for approximately 2 minutes, if even, and they managed to get 60% trash. So definitely just very fast here by Battle for Champion, dealing with it very well, as we see their Bloodlust coming up here at this point, but I'm pretty certain they are going to save it for the last boss.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the most dangerous boss in here. We'll talk a bit about that when we get there, but full screened at 35%, dealing with their cannon route as well. As long as Battle for Champion has 88% on the board before reaching the third boss's room, there is enough trash percentage left over after that boss to make sure that they complete their 100 in order to complete the dungeon and not have to backtrack too much. But nonetheless, here we get started. The one boss that Sours, for some reason, is particularly worried about, Knight Captain Valeri. Truthfully speaking, though, it is a boss that is quite mechanically sound, nothing too dangerous, certainly doesn't hit the tank very hard at all, but it can spiral out of control very quickly if you mismanage the barrels on the side. As you can see, when a barrel explodes, it will have a huge area denial that does a ton of damage. So somebody, usually the healer, will need to pick up these barrels and make sure they put them in appropriate parts of the room so that the team can safely sit there and DPS the boss.
Yeah, there's also a little bit of RNG involved, of course, on where the barrels spawn. Now, the more the healer and the tank need to move those barrels around, the less damage they obviously can do. So you want to make sure that you position the boss properly and try to get as little movement as possible, because also Jack's damage matters, of course, even if it doesn't do as much, of course, as the DPS here. But, you know, Jack dealing with the barrels very well, as you can see them kind of stacking in this corner here on the safe spot, and Jack is switching in and out of cat form. And quaking can be dangerous here if there's only very little space. But, you know, they can still deal with it even if you get hit by 2 or even 3 quakings. There's not really anything else on this boss that is happening. There's no other AoE, so they should be fine.
Both the healer and the tank here for Battle for Champion doing their best to get those barrels to safe spots. Now, chaining 2 barrels explosions together, because any barrel that is currently not exploding that's caught within the radius of an exploding barrel will also start to explode. Now, if you have a chain of 3 of them, that's when things start to spiral out of control, because you just don't have enough time by the time the next round of barrels goes down and everything spirals out of control. The team doing as well here as possible to keep this corner as their safe haven, but they've made that mistake a couple of times where they've left the boss in the middle of the room before moving to the corner, and this boss has a pretty lengthy cast sequence sometimes, meaning that she'll just sit in the middle of the room casting, sometimes doing nothing, and then the players just won't have access to damage her, especially with this full melee comp. Full screen incurring a death, 2 deaths actually on the board there, as one of the rogues is down. Cheat death obviously had proc. Battle res looks like it's coming up as they want to deal with the rest of their trash. They're about to proc the fourth Reaping Wave, and they probably want that rogue active in the second cannon, as we saw on the side of Battle for Champion, who hides in the corner right now.
Yeah, so while they were pulling the mobs into the cannon area, I do believe the tank and the rogue went down here. They did have to use 2 battle rests here to get them both up. Of course, they want the rogue up to do the double cannon kind of thing, as we also have seen from Battle for Champion. Battle for Champion side, of course, they are just much faster, much more efficient, of course. It's kind of the name of the game here, especially as we've seen it in Motherlode as well. But Battle for Champ about to kill the boss here. They only have 9% trash left, which they will get from the next cannon area. Usually what we see is teams kind of skipping that area, go to the boss first, and then come back. But we've also seen some teams just dealing with the Reaping first, so they don't have to backtrack afterwards.
Once again, the team needing to move out here from Knight Captain Valeria, unable to damage her for the last 1.5%. Finally, the explosions go off, and they do manage to finish her as Battle for Champion moves towards the final 5 mobs worth of trash before getting access to the final boss. It looks like they're just aggroing everything and dealing with the cannon for at least a couple of them before they move up, or the tank is just grabbing everything and planning to skip it. But it looks like they're bringing everything back to the cannon, and they will likely shadow meld the 5th round of Reaping off in the boss's room at the top of the jail. Full screen now, 75% on Knight Captain Valeria. Really not too far behind, actually. They dealt very well with their balcony phase with the cannons there, but have 3 deaths on the board, and certainly, I mean, 3/4 of the boss behind at this point. It's going to take a miracle for them to catch up to Battle for Champion.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, on the last boss, we've seen some lives coming in on the last boss, so definitely a lot of time you can lose there. They do have 1 battle rest available to them, but of course, if Jack dies, there's no battle rest, and Jack is the most likely player to die because he's the only ranged, so whenever there's an explosive burst coming out, Jack will always get it 100% of the time, while the other 2 explosive bursts can be random on any other member. So as soon as you get a couple of doubles, then Jack is the most likely member to die, so they definitely gotta watch out, especially if you have Quaking on top of that too.
And if he's anything like the Jack we know, he is very likely to die a lot of the time. As Korgus is getting ready to be pulled here, just a couple of the Lost Souls and leaking here from the Reaping Wave that they tried to skip. They just have such a massive aggro radius that it's oftentimes, even with distance and Shadow Meld, to get rid of all of them. But nonetheless, no problem for them as they finally grab a hold of Korgus. Last boss of the dungeon, trash is already done, and Bloodlust does go off for Battle for Champion. All of the players finding their respective nooks and crannies to make sure that they're properly spread out for both the Quaking, but also the explosive burst coming from the boss. Tank trying to get in position here to dodge the cross ignition. An absolute nightmare for tanks to be able to have the proper camera angle to see. Can be very easily clipped by it, as the first Deadeye is absorbed by the Prot Warrior. You want to make sure at least 3 people are rotating that debuff, unless you have something like a Blade Dance with a Demon Hunter, which we don't in this group.
Yeah, so the one thing to watch out here, of course, is the explosive burst. Now we see them drop very low here as Jack pops his Tree of Life. Now the problem with the explosive burst is that it can be RNG and you can get 2 very close to each other. Now the first one drops you very low, and then the healer does not have a lot of time to heal the people up before they get hit by the second one. Now that's why we probably see the Tree of Life here, just to out-heal some of those double casts. Now to see if the boss casts a double explosive burst or not is by checking the Deadeye cast. Whenever you cast a Deadeye, if after this ability explosive burst occurs, then it will be a double. As we can see right now, it's not a double, so definitely lucky here coming in for Battle for Champion. But yeah, it can be very dangerous, especially Quaking, because it interrupts the healer. Not only does it do damage, but it also interrupts your cast, so it can be dangerous here.
So we see that she Death has proc for one of the rogues on Battle for Champion, but I think the first rogue actually took a double Deadeye there, which is why he dips so low. I don't see the 3rd debuff out just yet. Usually you have 3 debuffs active before the first person can absorb again. So nonetheless, there goes the second Deadeye on the second rogue. Maybe it just chunks that hard, and it kind of, my eyes played tricked on me, but no cheat death proc nonetheless. One of them doesn't have available, and Fullscreened has downed Valeria, is over here on the last boss. Korgus has opted to skip the trash and return to it after, but did also lose the Monk throughout their 3rd boss fight. So don't have a battle res available, but do have the Bloodlust as they pop it. We'll keep an eye on them, but they're certainly quite a ways behind as Battle for Champion reaches the last 1/3 of health, 33% here for Overseer Korgus. The group doing well to reposition back into the corner and not getting clipped by those cannons, but just so much damage going out with this damage over time from the explosive burst and bad combinations of the Quaking as well.
Yeah, so definitely not so lucky here in this combination as they got the double on Battle for Champion side, but Jack dealing with it very well as he just goes in and out of bear form to make sure that he survives. Of course, Jack, the most important player here to survive, because anyone else can just be battle rest. So everything is on Jack here, as we can see the explosive burst plus the quaking coming out and him dropping very low, but he manages to survive.
Team doing well again to dodge that cross ignition there, as we have 13% left on Corgus. Another Deadeye going out. Jack goes in to bear form, but actually the Windwalker Monk ends up eating it instead, making sure that the healer is nice and safe, well able to heal through the upcoming explosive burst plus quake combo.
Yeah, so Battle for Champ about to kill the boss here. Very nice showing here again by Battle for Champion, only having this one death coming out. So just very clean and very fast. 18 minutes final time here.
So Battle for Champion showing their prowess and their first seed placement here as they just demolish the first series 2-0. I mean, you know, in both games, Nagura, I'm sure Sours is going to mention, it's not like the teams played bad, either of them, but there's just Battle for Champion just so much more aggressive, so much more clean with everything. Almost, you know, giving a bit of a Method EU vibe from the West.
And Battle for Champion really showing their big improvement there, and, you know, little Jack things in common, keeping everybody alive, even if the tank wants to manipulate other things. Anyway, Sours, a very good run out of Tolda Gore going through it, and wasn't quite the times we were seeing out of the Europeans, but they've been improving quite a bit going from week to week.
I mean, it changes so much with Aphesis, it can be hard to, like, truly judge 2 times unless they're occurring under the exact same circumstances. And we see just kind of like how scary the Tyrannical and Quaking is in this dungeon, where like Battle for Champion didn't have any issues at all with trash, right? This trash pool that Battle for Champion did was so beautiful, so executed. Normally, if I see a tank do this, they're going to run in here, they're going to try to pull 1 or 2 of those packs, and then they'll just die instantly. And he didn't die instantly. Like, that's remarkable. And then you see the healer's doing 40,000 HPS in a 5-man group at the end of a Tyrannical Quaking boss. That's a lot of healing for a 5-man instance. What do you, or am I wrong, Jack?
It's a very difficult and annoying fight, as I'm sure that Nagur could tell you, mainly because of the random effect where you can see it, like she mentioned a couple times, where you're able to kind of guess and you're able to know when the doubles are going to happen, but it's not always going to be something that you say, all right, a minute into the fight, this is a double, so this is how we prepare for it. Sometimes you get back-to-backs, sometimes you just get none at all and you get a free boss fight.
And
here.
Quaking.
And Quaking added on top of that. We even saw one of the rogues standing on Jack for a lot of it, ended up having a couple like Quaking overlaps, which dropped him really low, and then he finally moved on to the next side, so keeping him alive on that one. But with Battle for Champion taking Series 1 very convincingly, they will move on, and we will see Fullscreened moving down into that lower bracket